lead everyone to our very first keynote speeches that we're looking forward to, I would like to introduce Dr. Tonia Dousay, President of AECT USA, on the stage. She's going to give the speech about decoding the future, practical innovations in AI for learning. Dr. Tonia Dousay is the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. She is widely known for her influential publication, Survey of Instructional Design Models, now in its sixth edition. Dr. Dousay has designed and led nationally recognized programs supporting rural and indigenous educators in Alaska. She has presented internationally in South Africa and Indonesia. Dr. Dousay is passionate about building equitable learning systems and empowering educators worldwide. Please give a warm welcome to her first time in Thailand, Dr. Tonia.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is absolutely an honor to be here with you today. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Tonia Dousay, and I am originally from Texas in the United States, but now live in Alaska. I've also lived across the country, and so that contributes to my unique perspective at times. Of course, my slides are included in the materials for the conference, but if you would like to get to the slide notes first, you can get to the QR code on the screen. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I've had the privilege of serving as the Dean for the School of Education at the University of Alaska Anchorage for 3 years, and I'm currently in my presidency year for the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. I've been a member of AECT since 2009 as a first-year doctoral student, and so it's been wonderful to connect with a few of our doc students here and see some of our AECT former interns, meet future leaders of our field, and have conversations. As we begin this conversation today, I invite you to pause. Consider the everyday innovations and lessons that shape your perspective. What tools, habits, processes, and experiences help you solve problems or see things differently? Just think about that for a moment. These small but meaningful differences and insights are often the seeds of transformation. They are central to how we reflect and how we engage in innovation. So I'm going to distract you for a slight moment with the beautiful dress that I am wearing from Ziri. It's a wonderful company out of Kenya, and they work with local women in Kenya to apply cultural practices and sustainability to keep moving forward as a group and as women in this community. The dress itself has been designed specifically for women, for professionals who are in perhaps hot and humid climates, like the lovely Bangkok, or Kenya, or South Africa, or Texas. And so I love wearing these dresses because they not only represent an innovation, but they also represent the respect and honor that I bring to wearing this and knowing how it is made and where it comes from. When I was putting on my dress this morning, that made me think a little bit about what does Alaska have in common with Thailand? That might sound like a slightly crazy question. Alaska is very cold, but if we look beyond our temperatures and our climate, Alaska and Thailand both have rich, biodiverse ecosystems. They are both incredibly large states with rural populations. We both have to balance what it is like to serve an urban community such as Bangkok or a rural village that has elders and indigenous knowledge that is embedded into their practices. When I began to think about our similarities that way, my keynote actually began to take on a slightly different perspective for me as your speaker. So let's get started. I want to visit rural Oklahoma in the 1940s and 50s. At the bottom, you can get to the 2 papers that will help you learn more about the story I am about to share. The University of Tulsa entered into educational radio in the 1940s and 50s. One of these papers argues educational radio as the first MOOC because it was an open access learning experience, and it was broadcast across the airwaves throughout the state of Oklahoma. But when we think about our innovations and who benefits and why, we have to think about what kind of innovation serves people and not just systems. Is anybody familiar with American history and what was happening around the 40s and 50s? That was a very tumultuous time in our history as we began to grapple with race and racism. If a learner were to complete one of these courses by radio, they could then send in a newspaper clipping that they filled out, and that was their verification of completion. The policy at the time in the state wasn't specific to desegregating or any particular goal. The policy at the time was to exclude. So at that point, our national and our state agenda at the University of Tulsa was controlling who could be served by that particular innovation. But as we know, technology doesn't transform education. People do. So let me tell you how innovation occurred at the University of Tulsa, and not just that educational radio was a MOOC. Ben Hinkey was the director of the educational radio programs at the time. We were also dealing with the Brown versus the Board of Education, where we were trying to desegregate our schools and integrate together. But educational radio kept that barrier in place. When you filled out the form, there was a space for race, and you would write your race in. But what Ben found, because he didn't want to limit education, the university didn't require that field. So he and his staff very quietly began a revolution, telling people, don't fill out that blank. Just put your name and list the courses you've completed and your mailing address. By doing so, we have found evidence of hundreds of Black Americans who earned a degree by radio at a time when no one was earning an education. And that's powerful. But that reminds us that it was Ben Hinkey and his staff who were bending the rules, not just letting the technology drive. So when we trace our roots, let's see if we can learn some lessons from history and where we're heading. 1969, UK Open University launched and was the first place where we said, now we can democratize education and make it available to all. Keep in mind that's before I was born. I might also argue that that dream still isn't a reality, that we still haven't fully democratized our educational systems. But time moves on, and so does progress. 1990s, we saw the rise of learning management platforms and asynchronous learning. When I was a graduate student at Texas A&M University in 1999, I was using First Class, the learning content management system, that I don't think has been in use for more than 20 years. I was learning how to use WebCT to help faculty design online courses. WebCT is now known as a very large company. Does anybody happen to know? Blackboard. So Anthology's Blackboard product was originally WebCT 25, 30 years ago. Seems like a long time, right? Well, then we jump. 2008, the very first MOOCs are launched, and we start to see literature on MOOCs, and now we're hearing things like disruption and transformation, and MOOCs are going to change everything that we do. Well, they can change some things, but not everything. And then COVID hit. I don't know what it was like in Thailand during COVID, but that shift to remote learning was both a blessing and a curse. As a blessing, it showed the world that you can do all of these things online, and you can do them well. As a curse, it's kind of like some of our tools, like our AI tools or Canva. You may not be a designer, but you use canva.com to design things. A little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, and so we see the perpetuation of poor learning design and poor practices because we suddenly thrust teachers into this limelight and said, you can do it, here's 5 hours of professional development to figure out this tool. Many of us in this room have taken decades to study this and to do it well. So it was a blessing and a curse of COVID. But then we've reached current day, 2023, and the emergence of AI as a design partner, not just a tool. I can honestly say that one of my faculty members in meetings will often say, I had a conversation with my thought partner. And what she means is she was working with ChatGPT. So what do these roots teach us? We're going to focus on what we've been doing in Alaska as a result of COVID. So what moments of innovation truly transform learning, and why did they stick? Now here's the fun part about this question. Everyone's going to have a different answer. Everyone's going to think of a different innovation because everyone's lived experiences control your perspective. From my perspective, I'm a teacher educator. When COVID hit, I was an associate dean at the University of Idaho, and I coordinated our secondary science education programs, producing future science teachers. Suddenly, COVID hits, and my teacher candidates can't get into the schools for these very valuable service learning hours that are necessary to understand this career and to be a successful teacher. Schools had to limit who could come in, who was even interacting with their students. And so we had to get creative. Policy tells us to make funding decisions and shape access to education, but it can't think of everything. Innovation that endures is grounded in both vision and infrastructure. So what do I mean by this? When COVID hit and we couldn't get our students into the schools, we went out and found a partner. And we were working with a national foundation that produces science curriculum for teachers, but that curriculum was designed entirely for an in-person delivery. Well, as an organization, they needed help converting these courses for distance activities. And so my students stepped into that role as an instructional designer. I had the vision of how can we move these students forward into the new version of education. Because while we didn't know what the future would look like, we knew it would be different than life before 2020. In this case, for the infrastructure piece, I had to lean on that national foundation. I had to work with my school district, my local school district, to identify opportunities for us to serve them. But again, the systems were breaking down. It was the people behind the systems who were transforming and changing. So that's one of the reasons of why an innovation sticks when another one fails. But what happens when progress leaves people behind? What would learning look like if we build it and sustain it with proper support systems? I could probably spend an entire lecture on just that question. But I want you to instead focus on layering, accountability, and putting people first. When we think about our policies, how can we ensure that they fund human infrastructure, not just hardware and hype? Tech forward doesn't always mean learner-centered. So as we explore what I've been talking about thus far, rural Oklahoma or teacher education during COVID, we have to look beyond. we have to see more than just what is in front of us. When technologies have the potential to disrupt, they also have the ability to disrupt in a negative way, not just positive, and we don't always look at that. See if we can get our video to play. I'm going to show you a very short clip that is about 90 seconds long to help frame the next part of our conversation. No sound. There should be sound. Hold, please. The beauty is, if you're looking at the screen, it is still communicating in words what you would be hearing with audio. The video is sharing the opening to a panel discussion at South by Southwest EDU held in Austin last year. It talks about some of these questions that I've posed to you already. Who has access? Why do they have access? How did they get access? And how do we prevent the third wave of the digital divide? When I think about where I've come from, I think about how I've been an early adopter of technology. Unfortunately, that was a long time ago, and I lived in rural Texas. I have peers who were there faster than I was. I have peers who got there behind. Here we go.
But as this technology booms, questions of educational justice and ethics arise, such as what ethical ways can AI be used to boost student learning and not replace it? What can be done to eliminate the bias coded within AI programs? And will students of color and those from low-income households have equitable access? The data paints a sobering picture. Research shows the divides in access to computers and broadband fall along racial and economic lines. Study after study has shown how AI algorithms exhibit biases. The World Economic Forum predicts that by 2025, machines, including AI systems, will perform over half of all workplace tasks. And today's students aren't being prepared for the jobs of tomorrow. In this session, experts in research, consumer technology, civil rights, and ed technology will engage in a robust conversation on how to stop what's being called the third wave of the digital divide. Here, attendees will experience a different picture of AI, where all students are given access to the tools needed to succeed in the technology-fueled workplace. Students are taught AI technologies that represent diverse perspectives and backgrounds. AI supplements learning, not replaces it. Imagine the future of AI in the classroom with us.
I'm so glad that worked.
Artificial intelligence,
now it wants
or
to play.
AI, is changing education in unimaginable
pause it?
ways. But as this technology booms, questions...
There we go. Thank you. I want to pick up on something that the narrator mentioned about access. And I want to highlight the title, Whose Infrastructure? This morning I had a beautiful conversation with Jen as we were looking at how to adopt AI in Thailand and what does that framework look like, what principles are applied. And we were actually talking about how it's not just who has access, but who controls the information in that access. I might give you an example here. Formerly known as Twitter, X uses the large language model Grok as its AI backbone. Unfortunately, the global billionaire who controls X and Grok controls X and Grok. We've just been alerted to some behaviors from the tool in the last few weeks that demonstrate completely unacceptable levels of racism. Messaging that is incredibly dangerous. And so we really have to become critical consumers of anything around us. So it's not just who gets to be digitally present, who gets to be digitally powerful. And how can we shift towards equity frameworks that include identity, trust, and representation? Personally, I do not trust Elon Musk. It's on record. Infrastructure without agency still leaves learners behind. What do I mean by that? When we've been innovating in our programs, when we were launching online teacher preparation, we still had to give the learners a choice in what they were doing. We still had to have the tools be accessible and available. But let's think about this question from a different perspective. There's a national revolution happening in the United States for teacher preparation. As of a few years ago, we now have the ability to work with teachers, future teachers, as registered apprentices through formal federal and state programs. This is a bit of a game changer because it's supposed to lean in to ideas of competency-based education, of being able to perform a task, be assessed on it, and not necessarily have to take an entire 3-credit course because you've demonstrated that competency already. When this model was presented to us in Alaska, it was starting out of the southern United States in Tennessee. It was a model that might be working well for them, but I saw right away it wouldn't work for us because that model expects learners to come to the programs with at least 90 post-secondary credits. I live in Alaska. Most of our citizens don't graduate high school, much less go on to earn post-secondary credits. So we had to flip this narrative to figure out how to deal with the problem. We had to think about whose infrastructure we were using and how to make it ours. So this is where we move from inclusion to co-design. Co-design emphasizes shared ownership. So think about that for a moment. What does it look like to share ownership instead of control ownership? It resists the deficit model. I absolutely love this particular aspect of co-design because it brings to life and it codifies many indigenous educational practices. Because we shouldn't be focusing on the deficits. We need to be focusing on how to move beyond a deficit and into what is it you have and how do we make it better. Moving beyond a deficit means not thinking about how do we come in and fix you, but you tell me what you think you need and I figure out how to help you design that. If you're curious more about co-design, I invite you to check out Sanders and Stappers. But this concept extends because design affordances for some are disaffordances for others. So this plays off of a previous comment that we had. Who's in control? Whose infrastructure? In this case, I can think about how you might design a new tool for learners, but you're in an urban area, such as Bangkok or Houston or Los Angeles or Seattle. And so you focus on what's immediately around you. And that tool is a great tool for urban learners. But once that tool gets applied out into a rural or indigenous group, it becomes a barrier. It could be in the way that it's designed. It could be in the language that it uses. It could be in the way that you access it. But that defeats the purpose. So innovation demands that we identify who is left and redesign with, not for, them. Settle on that thought for a moment. Who is left out? Universal Design for Learning is one of my absolute favorite frameworks in the world because as an instructor, I have never had to modify a class to meet a student's accessibility needs. When I'm contacted about an accommodation, I acknowledge it with the student to say, I see you, the human in my class. I see your needs. Here's how my class is designed and how I think it meets your needs. If you disagree, I invite you to meet with me and we find a way to co-design your experience. 16 years, folks. I've never had to change a course design because I started out thinking about who was left behind from the beginning. Costanza Shock is another great book that I highly, highly encourage. It's also available open access through MIT. So as we rethink who designs learning, I'm reflecting, what does it look like to shift from designing for to designing with? This has been a complete change even in my own practice because I think about the phases of instructional design and an analysis, and I need to know who my learner is, and I need to know what my context is. But at no point do I ask my learner, how would you like this designed? I'm observing them like a fish in a fishbowl. Can I really have an impact on them if that's how I'm getting there? So how might policy go beyond access and infrastructure, this is my favorite, to reward shared design, because that's where the impact is. Oftentimes our policies focus on punishment. They don't focus on reward. They take a deficit model, much like our learning design does. They don't take us to where we want to be, because equity isn't just a seat at the table, it's a voice in how the table gets built. So when I think about our registered apprenticeship program, I'm thinking about how we've worked with our community partners and how we've worked with our students to elevate them to become student ambassadors, to help us think through these transitions in history, what we learned from educational radio, what we've learned by putting access not just physically, but online. I talked about Alaska being a very large rural state. We've had to adopt hybrid learning and really think about our students as partners. They've told us, I'm an educator, I can't take class until the evenings. So our classes don't begin until 4:30 p.m. When we design our online courses, they typically have a 1-hour weekly meeting for that community building experience. But then the rest of the activities are asynchronous. So it is a fully hybrid program because that's what the students said they need. Not what we said they need, what they told us they need. So this is where we really have to move into that co-design space and elevate these voices that we don't often hear. So as we wrap up today, my call to reframe innovation is to focus on rooting in people, not just platforms, that we honor our human contexts, that we build systems that start with that lived experience rather than an afterthought of that lived experience. Design with, not for, embrace co-design, empower communities to shape their own learning ecosystems instead of being a tourist who drops by and says, here's what you need. And sustain by centering dignity. Scalability needs to align with cultural relevance and local ownership. Think about how many innovations have failed because they did not consider the local context or the elder knowledge in that community. So my final quote for you this morning: when we design with dignity, we don't just innovate, we liberate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tonia. That is such an inspiring speech.